Kamado is from Johto. In Legends Arceus, Commander Kamado, alongside all members of the Galaxy team, come from regions other than Hisui. In the Japanese version of the game, Kamado speaks with a dialect people from the real-world region of Kansai speak with when he loses his composure during the climax of the game. If you played the English version, it's the part where he basically speaks with a country accent. Kansai is the real-world inspiration for the Johto region, which would suggest that Kamado is originally from Johto. Additionally, in the Italian version of the game, Kamado directly mentions the Whirl Islands and Mount Silver by name, further contributing to the theory that Johto was his home. Additionally, this matches the real-world history that Legends Arceus is based on the mainland Japanese, colonizing the island of Izo in the late 1800s and renaming it Hokkaido, the inspiration for the Sinnoh region. So we know he's from Johto, but can we actually narrow down where in Johto he's from? Yes, we can, and in fact the answer is Mahogany Town, and there is actually significant evidence for this. First of all, Mahogany Town is called the home of the ninja. While Kamado himself isn't a ninja, his right-hand man Benny is from the same town as him, and he is a ninja. Additionally, Kamado and Benny moved to Hisui with the Galaxy Squad because their hometown was attacked and ravaged by enraged Pokémon. What's next to Mahogany Town? The Lake of Rage. It had to have gotten its name somehow. Maybe it was given that name because of the disaster that caused Kamado and Benny to leave, with Pokémon from the lake devastating Mahogany Town. Finally, Mahogany Town's specialty item is the Rage Candy Bar. In the Generation 4 games, Professor Rowan, a descendant of Kamado, really likes eating Rage Candy Bars. Perhaps his family would still eat the Rage Candy Bar as part of their heritage from Mahogany Town. But overall, this is a very strong theory, and I think it was intended by Game Freak. Hoopa moved the Sky Pillar. Hoopa's Omega Ruby Dex entry tells a story about how it once moved an entire castle with its rings in order to get to the treasure underneath. In Hoenn, the only structure that is reasonably castle-like is the Sky Pillar. Additionally, it is also weirdly out of place, just a random massive tower in the middle of an ocean route. It doesn't really match anything else in the region architecture-wise. I guess maybe Sootopolis? This is the most likely candidate in Hoenn for the castle Hoopa moved, except for the fact that the location description in Oras says that this tower was created for the veneration of a legendary Pokémon that lives far above in the heavens. So it was a tower meant to worship Rayquaza, meaning that the Hoennian people built it. Now, it's still possible it was built elsewhere in Hoenn, like maybe in Sootopolis itself, since that's where the Cave of Origin also is. So the duality of Groudon and Kyogre below and Rayquaza above in the same location is fitting. But I think that this castle is ultimately somewhere in Kalos, Hoopa's home region. Or if you go full crackpot, the castle could be Dahara Tower in the anime, which is a part of Dahara City, an anime-only location supposedly in Kalos. Dahara Tower has a huge connection to Hoopa and its lore of stealing gold, which makes me think that this is the castle the Dex entry talks about. Also, Dahara City is technically canon to the games, as special event legendaries in Japan and Korea back in 2015 and 2016 had Dahara City as their OT, implying that they came from Dahara City. Growlithe named Arcanine.
They must be up to no good! Arcanine! Flamethrower!
In an episode of the early anime, Officer Jenny calls her Growlithe Arcanine. Now, this could be a mistake that the anime makes all too often, but what if Jenny just nicknamed her Growlithe RK9, not spelled like the Pokemon, but the letters RK and the number 9? Since her Growlithe is a police dog, it could be that RK9 is its designation code, just a coincidence that it sounds like the Pokemon Arcanine. Red lost to Rainbow Rocket Giovanni. In the Rainbow Rocket episode of Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, Giovanni says that he feels somewhat nostalgic that once again a child is standing in front of him, challenging him and Team Rocket. Of course, this is referring to Red in the original Kanto games facing off against Giovanni, but since the Rainbow Rocket versions of the team leaders are the ones who are successful in their goals, this means that Giovanni would have actually won against Red in his universe and never gone into hiding. Would have been nice to see what happened in these alternate timelines. What did Red do after he lost? What does a world where Giovanni won look like, and how does it affect the events of the Gen 2 games? Shiny Magcargo in the Pokédex. By now, we are all familiar with the infamous Magcargo dex entry, the one which says that it burns at over 18,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Of course, in reality, lava doesn't burn that hot. However, this is based on regular Magcargo, which burns red, and temperature-wise, red fire is the coldest type of fire, burning between 1,000 and 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Shiny Magcargo, however, burns with a violet flame, which, when only taking temperature as a factor, is one of the hottest colors of fire. In fact, so hot that normally it is not seen anywhere else in the universe. Violet fire is around 71,000 degrees Fahrenheit, burning at around 9 times the heat of the temperature of the sun, and exceeding the 18,000 degrees mentioned in the dex entry. However, this makes the existence of shiny Magcargo even more ridiculous. If you want to give Magcargo's shiny colors a more reasonable explanation, we can say that the purple color is not caused solely by the temperature, but rather the type of chemicals the Magcargo is burning, changing the color. This is why sometimes you can see a gas stove produce purple flames, even though hopefully your stove is not burning at 71,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This provides a better explanation, with Magcargo still burning at a more reasonable temperature of around 500 degrees Fahrenheit. However, people still touching it and the dex entry are still bullshit. Gastly and Shellder. Gengar is Clefable's ghost? Move over. It's time for the better theory. Gastly being the ghost of Cloyster. There's actually quite a bit of evidence to back this up, even more than Gengar and Clefable. Of course, first is the fact that the appearance between Gastly and Cloyster's inner body are very similar. Of course, they're both just black orbs with mean eyes and a cruel smile, but still similar regardless. Both Cloyster and Gastly are purple, with their shiny colors being blue. Additionally, Gengar and Cloyster have the same height, both being 4 foot 11 inches. Shellder's Gen 1 sprite prominently features its tongue, which could be a reference to the only regular damaging ghost-type move in Gen 1, Lick. And the final nail in the coffin is that in the Pokédex, Gastly comes right after Cloyster. Now, this could either mean that early in development there were maybe plans to have both of them in one evolutionary line, maybe even as a split evolution, or maybe it was meant to be more of a Kangaskhan and Cubone type situation, only slightly hinted at but with no meaningful evidence to tie the two together. But regardless, this is one of the best Pokemon conspiracies, short, simple, yet believable. Arceus is a hand. We've got another banger of a theory here. Arceus' dex entry from Diamond says that it shaped the universe with its 1,000 arms. Now, obviously, looking at it, Arceus does not have 1,000 arms. In fact, it does not have any arms. So what is this dex entry talking about? It's possible that the 1,000 arms are metaphorical, or as we mentioned in an earlier entry on this Iceberg, it could be referring to the unknown. However, with Legends Arceus, it was confirmed that the in-game Pokemon Arceus is just a projection for the god to interact with the mortal world, a mere fraction of its true form crafted so that we could comprehend it. Thinking about it this way, the Pokemon Arceus is just an arm for the god Arceus to reach the mortal realm. And, well, if you remove the head of Arceus, what remains is unmistakably a hand, with the cross symbol even looking like a ring on one of its fingers. I think this is one of the theories in this Iceberg that is true and intentional by Game Freak. Arceus, as we know it, is just one of its 1,000 arms, a physical form it takes to interact with the real world. That's why it's seemingly so weak for something that is supposedly the creator god, and also why that there can be multiple of these Arceus Pokemon. The true god Arceus is much more powerful, with power likely equivalent to a base stat total of 720,000. Machoke's skin is ripped. If you look at Machoke's arms, you can see these red stripes. Officially, these are just patterns, however they invoke the sense that the skin is literally being ripped apart, exposing the muscle underneath. Since Machoke's muscles are much bigger, the skin literally can't contain it and starts ripping apart. Pretty gnarly, though personally I think these lines are a reference to the stretch marks bodybuilders get when they put on muscle very quickly. It's a similar situation, and actually in some cases they could tear through the skin and cause bleeding. It actually would make sense in context, since technically the evolution from Machop to Machoke happens very quickly, meaning that Machoke would get these stretch marks from gaining so much muscle almost instantaneously. Lamarckian Pokemon. If you paid attention during your high school biology class, you might recall the Lamarckian theory of evolution. It's named after the French biologist Lamarck, and it claims that traits that an individual gains within their lifetime are actually hereditary and can be passed down to offspring. For example, Lamarck would say that if you worked out and gained huge muscles, and then conceived a child, the child would then be born with huge muscles, or at the very least have an easier time getting huge muscles. Alternatively, if you studied really hard and became smart, then your child would be born naturally smarter than it would if you didn't study. Of course, now this theory is completely debunked, and biological science advanced the Darwinian theory of evolution, and that became more accepted, and combined that with the later discovery of DNA, and we now understand how evolution in species happens. All that matters is the DNA you are born with, and no matter your lifestyle, the DNA you pass through your offspring remains the same. Genetic variation and evolution come from random mutations in DNA which may or may not be beneficial, and if they are beneficial, they're simply more likely to be passed down and become common among future generations. To put it in Pokemon terms, Vulpix didn't become a Alolan Vulpix because the Vulpix somehow reacted and worked towards being able to survive better in cold regions. It's just that among the original population of Vulpix, maybe one of them had a random gene mutation for albinism, giving it white fur in the ice type. Normally this gene would be harmful to the Vulpix and make it less good at hunting in Vulpix's normal habitats, meaning that not many Vulpix with the white fur and ice type survived to pass on their genes, meaning that the red fire type Vulpix stayed dominant. But when this specific population of Vulpix moved to Mount Lanakila and Alola, it turned out that the random albinism and ice-type gene actually helped a lot, so these white Vulpix would be able to survive and reproduce more than the red fire-type Vulpix, leading to the ice-type Vulpix to become the dominant Vulpix in Alola, hence becoming a regional form. So that's how genetic diversity works in the real world, and why genetic diversity is important. Even if a genetic difference may not seem beneficial now, it could be vital in the future to keep the species alive amongst changing conditions. However, this sort of Darwinian theory is usually not the case in Pokemon, or at least it's not the only theory in Pokemon, and we know this due to breeding mechanics. Specifically, egg moves. Egg moves are moves a Pokemon can only learn if their parents knew it at the time the egg was laid. For example, if you breed a male Snorlax that knows Belly Drum with a female Charizard, the baby Charmander will be born knowing Belly Drum. However, this isn't the case for any Snorlax that bred with Charizard. The Snorlax has to know Belly Drum for the child Charmander to be born knowing Belly Drum, which means that in the Pokemon world, something that a child is inherently born with can be changed by the actions a parent takes. In this case, the Snorlax taking the time to learn Belly Drum is why its child Charmander knows Belly Drum. This is a textbook case of Lamarckism, meaning that in Pokemon, Lamarckism is a valid explanation on how species can introduce genetic diversity, at least within the bounds of the mechanics shown. Odd Keystone and Twinleaf Town. In the Gen 4 games, if you go to Twinleaf Town, surf on the small pond, and then go to the left in a specific spot among the tree line, you can find an Odd Keystone, which is the vessel that holds the spirits that make up Spiritomb. In the game, there are two other ways you can get an Odd Keystone. The intended way is to speak with a mysterious man obscured in the corner on one of the routes who just tells you to take it without saying much else. You also have a rare chance of digging one up in the underground, likely to allow the player to get as many Spiritomb as they want. However, this Twinleaf Town Odd Keystone is the odd one out, no pun intended. It's such an out-of-the-way location, and it's also along the boundary tree line to boot. There's nothing here at all to indicate that an important item would be located there. This is present in all the Sinnoh games, including Platinum and the remakes, so I'm assuming that it's intentional, though it could have just been some dev accidentally placed a hidden Odd Keystone item there for testing when first adding it to the game, forgot to remove it, and then Platinum and BDSP just reused that code without removing the mistake. But if it was intentional, I guess it was just to reward people for using the dowsing machine in the Twinleaf Town Lake. But even then, it's still a very strange choice. Lore-wise, I guess it's not too far-fetched to say that an Odd Keystone was left abandoned in the forest near Twinleaf Town. Scrapped Hoenn Snow Biome. This is a theory that Mount Chimney and the surrounding routes, as well as Full Arbor Town, were initially meant to be a snowy biome instead of the volcano it became in the final game. Quite the drastic change if true, but here is some of the evidence. The ash falling on Route 113 looks very similar to snow falling, and could have just been a simple color switch when they decided to turn it into a volcanic route. Furthermore, one of the more prominent features on Mount Chimney itself is the cable car, which could have initially been some sort of ski lift. After all, there was a scrapped border class found in the code of the Gen 3 games, with borders in the Gen 2 games being snowboarders that used ice types. Maybe the beta version of Mount Chimney was a ski mountain, where you could fight borders going up and down the mountain. Additionally, this could be where you would have found Snorunt. Snorunt is a weird encounter in the Gen 3 games, being a rare encounter exclusive to Low Tide and Shoal Cave, a non-mandatory late-game location, meaning that it's likely many people will never even encounter one. And if you have a stuck internal clock due to bad battery and you're stuck on high tide time, you can never get a Snorunt at all. It's a bit strange that Snorunt and Glalie, which overall are pretty mediocre Pokemon strength-wise and looks-wise, have an encounter restriction similar to that of Bagon or Phoebus. Maybe in the initial game, the Mount Chimney Snow biome would have Snorunt as a very common encounter, similar to how it's treated in future games, and it makes more sense for the strength of the line being more fitting for the mid-game menace. However, upon the change of that area to a volcano biome, Snorunt simply had nowhere to go. Finally, let's talk about Hilbert Town. This is a small town that sits right next to Mount Chimney. However, its name doesn't really match it, like it's fall, the season right before winter, and arbor, as in trees. Not exactly what you expect for a town right next to a scorching volcano. And it's also a farming town, which I guess also wouldn't typically be found next to a volcano. It would be somewhat less out of place in a snowy biome. Also, many people have pointed out that the Fall Arbor theme sounds more like a stereotypical snowy biome theme, rather than a volcanic biome theme. However, there are some issues with this theory. For example, they probably knew that from very early development of the Gen 3 games, that they would be based around Groudon and Kyogre, teams Aqua and Magma. Water is already represented heavily in Hoenn, so they would also likely plan to make a fiery section of the map a volcano region from the beginning. Also, Hoenn is a tropical region, so they'd probably not have a significant snowy biome on the map. The scrapped border class could just be a leftover from when they imported trainer classes from the Gen 2 games, and they were likely never intended to be in the game at all. And finally, regarding cable cars and Fall Arbor Town, the idea of people coexisting peacefully with nature, even nature that is stereotypically hostile like volcanoes, is a big part of the themes of the Hoenn games, so of course they would show the volcano area to be unexpectedly peaceful and chill. Mega Shellder. When Slowbro Mega evolves, the Slowbro itself actually stays the same. The only difference is that the Shellder biting its tail grows bigger to cover its whole body. Of course, this is a natural evolution of the change between Slowpoke and Slowbro, where the Slowpoke itself stays the same and the only difference is that there's a Shellder biting its tail now. But technically, if Mega Evolution is only changing the Shellder and not the Slowbro inside, isn't it technically Shellder that's Mega Evolving? Some interesting food for thought. Mewtwo's cloning machine bones. In Pokemon the movie Mewtwo Strikes Back, Mewtwo makes a cloning machine that has these strangely designed arms that look like human bones. Many people assume that these are actually human bones, and in fact the human bones are from the scientists Mewtwo killed at the beginning of the movie. Skeptics say that this isn't the case because if you look at the beginning of the movie, everything was destroyed, so there would be no remains of the scientists left visible. However, this is a kids movie, so they probably couldn't explicitly show the skeletons of once living characters. However, the implication is still there, and it fits in a darkly thematic way. The bones of the scientists who spent their careers furthering cloning technology would be used to build an ultimate cloning machine. Definitely the type of melodramatic irony that Mewtwo would enjoy. Moon's sister. I think this is one of the theories that is most spread around as fact, despite being explicitly deconfirmed. Although, since it is about the Adventures manga, it's not really well known outside that specific sub-community. This is the theory that Platinum, the manga equivalent of Dawn, is the older sister of Moon, the manga equivalent of the Gen 7 protagonist, Celine. They're both from Sinnoh, born to a family of scholars, and Moon actually lived and worked with Mr. Berlitz, studying various poisons. Also, Moon wears an outfit that's a color inversion of Platinum's. In fact, in one panel, Moon even refers to Platinum as sister. So, confirmed, right? Well, no. The artist said that there wasn't an intention to make them sisters in a tweet, but he later teased that this could be the case. Also, while it was stated earlier in the manga that Platinum was an only child, it's possible that Moon was born after. There's not really any confirmation about the time that passed in universe between their two arcs, but assuming that it's similar to the 10 years that passed between the real-world releases of Gens 4 and 7, Moon could have been born right after the Platinum arc, and still be maybe 10 to 11 in the Sun and Moon arc. But still a bit of a stretch. Also, Moon calling Platinum sister is likely just a term of endearment, not an actual description. Birdkeeper Maylene. This theory states that Maylene was initially intended to be, or has some connection to, flying-type trainers. It's mostly based on the fact that Maylene just looks like a birdkeeper, with both having a similar hairstyle. Also, her Gen 4 art has her doing a flying kick. Additionally, in the BDSP Battle Tower, she has Blaziken, Empoleon, and Dragonites as part of her roster, which are all either birds or flying-type Pokemon. Finally, once you beat her, you get the ability to use the HM Fly for travel. So, to me at least, it definitely seems like Maylene has some connection to the flying type, and I think a headcanon that she used to be a birdkeeper is not too far out there. Though if this was the case, it would be cool if she used a Staraptor, being the Sinnoh bird that knows close combat and all. Guzzlord is Muk. A well-known yet fun theory. In Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, we find out that Guzzlord's home dimension is the Ultra Ruin. The Ultra Ruin is a futuristic, post-apocalyptic version of Alola's Lumiose City, with some disaster in the past, maybe around 60 to 80 years prior, causing the humans of the world to flee the planet itself. We only see one other person in the Ultra Ruin, someone who is supervising the area wearing a hazmat suit. Now, considering that we only see a little sliver of the Ultra Ruin, with Guzzlord seemingly going on a rampage, many people just initially assumed that it was Guzzlord who caused this destruction, being an alien invader. However, if you look closer at the details of the Ultra Ruin, you can see that this is not the case. First of all, the person in the Ultra Ruin is wearing a hazmat suit themed like Guzzlord, which would be weird if Guzzlord were alien invaders destroying Alola. Additionally, if you continue talking to the guy after catching Guzzlord, you see that he calls Guzzlord Mr. Glutton and tells you to take good care of it. Once again, if the Guzzlord species destroyed the world, why would this guy be giving it cute nicknames and telling us to take care of it? Well, simple. Guzzlord didn't destroy the world, but they're in fact helping to clean it up. Other dialogue from the hazmat suit guy, as well as Guzzlord's text entries, tell us about how it will eat anything, toxic waste, trash, rubble, and that's what it was doing before we caught it. So it's actually cleaning up the world after a disaster. And we also have a good idea of what the disaster is. When exploring the Ultra Ruin, we come across a poster advertising a power plant. When asking Hazmat Suit Guy about it, he says that most of them were burned by his grandparents' generation, and they tend to avoid talking about the power plant. So I think what caused this disaster was this power plant going haywire and releasing toxic, possibly radioactive waste in a massive explosion, ruining the ecosystem and atmosphere of the whole world. Think Chernobyl, but the worst case scenario. But where did Guzzlord come from then? Well, the power plant disaster probably caused many Pokemon to mutate, specifically in the ground zero of the disaster, Alola. Guzzlord is probably an Alolan Pokemon mutated, and there's a pretty obvious candidate, Alolan Muk. Alolan Muk's dex entries focus on how it always eats trash, a characteristic it shares with Guzzlord. And it's interesting that they gave Guzzlord this characteristic, since while it makes sense for a poison type to eat trash, having a dark dragon type eat trash is a bit more unique. But it makes sense if Guzzlord is Alolan Muk after severe mutations, turning its poison type into the dragon type, but keeping the dark typing. And then these Guzzlord helped clean up the toxic waste in the decades following, hoping that one day, humanity could once again return to their home. So yes, Guzzlord is basically just the Pokemon version of Wally. Shaymin, thank you. If you listen to Shaymin's cry, you can hear it saying something along the lines of, thank you. It's easier to hear if you slow it down. Of course, this isn't just people hearing random words, as Shaymin is classified as the gratitude Pokemon, and feelings of gratitude and thanking people are integral to its lore. Its Pokedex entries talk about how it enjoys feelings of gratitude from humans, and in the past it would be drawn by people expressing gratitude for winter's end, after which it would help the flowers bloom to hearken spring. In the Shaymin event, you explicitly have to type in a person who you would like to give your thanks to before Shaymin appears. So it would also make sense that Shaymin's cry would have noises that sound like it's saying thank you. Chateau poisoning. The old Chateau is one of the creepiest places in the Pokemon franchise, partly due to the fact that there are actual human ghosts that appear and disappear and are not directly explained. There are 2 ghosts in the Chateau, one of a little girl and one of a butler. There are also 2 other supernatural events, a painting upstairs with red eyes that follow you, as well as a glaring statue downstairs. We can assume that these are also human ghosts possessing objects. but apparently in the original Diamond and Pearl, the painting is implied to be Gengar, as you can encounter one when interacting with the painting with Pokemon Emerald in the second slot of the DS. But hey, maybe this Gengar used to be a human. Once again, it's unknown what exactly happened to them. But considering that in the old Chateau, you can find an antidote in the garbage can of the kitchen, many people suspected that this family died due to a poisoning conspiracy, which is a typical storyline for these old haunted mansions. Perhaps the butler wanted to have the mansion for himself, but in order to get the mansion, he would need to get rid of the owner, his wife, and his daughter. So he would poison their meal one day to kill them all in one go. But the butler would also usually eat with the family, so he himself would have to eat the poisoned food as not to draw suspicion. In order to mitigate this issue, the butler hid an antidote in the kitchen's trash can, so that after eating the food, he could go to the kitchen, take the antidote, and live. However, this plan failed, and the butler didn't get to the antidote in time, so he died alongside the family. Since then, the ghosts would haunt the now abandoned mansion, with the father haunting the painting, the mother haunting the statue, the daughter haunting her childhood room, and the butler haunting the dining hall. Mr. Bonding Origins. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, we see the origins of Mr. Bonding from Pokemon X and Y, the person who gives you the O-powers. In ORAS, over the course of the game, strange old men give you the various O-powers. However, after all this, the strange old men tell you that they are getting old, and task you with finding another powerless man to pass their powers on to. You find this guy and bring him to the old men, after which they do the strange ritual where they circle him and disappear one by one, presumably fusing with him to give him their power. After all the men complete the ritual, the powerless man becomes Mr. Bonding. So yeah, a strangely weird and horrifying origin for Mr. Bonding. These guys basically just possess some innocent person's body. Gastrodon's shell. Gastrodon's Pokédex entries state that it once had a shell on its back in ancient times, but now it's gone, with only vestigial traces left in Gastrodon's cells. It would be cool if we got a regional form of Gastrodon that kept its shell from its ancestors, or even a Mega Gastrodon that reawakens the DNA that grows in its shell, similar to how Mega Ampharos awakens the dragon's blood within Ampharos. Light and Dark Pokemon. We're not talking about types here, but rather another special category in the TCG. Light Pokemon are special Pokemon that have more HP and typically have moves focused on healing and protection over attacking. On the other hand, Dark Pokemon are Pokemon that have less HP but more attacking power. They are considered as evil due to being raised with hatred by bad trainers like Team Rocket. Similarly, Light Pokemon are Pokemon raised with kindness. As we know that some previous TCG mechanics have inspired some in-game mechanics, maybe these could be a future mechanic, with how you actually treat your Pokemon when training them, leading to differences in battle and stats. Next, Battle Facility Faller. In previous games we have seen Fallers being Battle Facility trainers, usually forgotten, obscure characters, getting a highlight in the stories of a different game. We got Annabelle, who was initially a Frontier Brain but became an Interpol agent investigating Ultra Beasts after falling in the Gen 7 games. And in Legends Arceus, Ingo, a battle subway leader in Black and White 2, becomes a warden after falling into Hisui. Both of these characters got a huge popularity boost after they became Fallers, and I think we're going to see another Battle Facility boss become a Faller that's involved with the story. Assuming that they're going to be from a different generation's Battle Facility, we have Gens 4 and 6 to pick from. Gen 4 has a fun variety of bosses, though the Fallers tend to be the more obscure of the bosses, and I think Hall, Matron, Argenta would be a good pick, though I also think Thornton could be a unique personality to feature more prominently. Gen 6 gives us the Battle Maison, which has the Battle Chatelaines as the bosses. Honestly, they're all so similar, I don't think any one would be preferred over the other, but it would be cool to see at least one of them get more fleshed out. Go Giovanni is Rainbow Rocket Giovanni. At the end of Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon's Rainbow Rocket episode, Giovanni says that he will plan to go to another world to conquer it. Afterwards, Giovanni and Team Rocket appear in our world through Pokemon Go. In the trailer revealing Team Go Rocket, he says that Earth is where he will unleash his evil next, implying that we're just one dimension out of many where he had committed evil, and the only multi-dimensional Giovanni we saw is the Rainbow Rocket Giovanni. Evil Malamar. In the Pokemon X, Y, and Z anime, there was a subplot with 3 sentient evil Malamar, who plotted to rule the world by mind-controlling humans to carry out their plans. Ash and friends actually had to team up with Team Rocket to fight them, which ended with them time traveling into the future and promising to come back one day to continue their evil schemes. Of course, after this they were never seen again to this day in the anime, and many people believe that the anime just dropped this plotline and forgot about it. However, now we know that Pokemon Legends ZA is coming out soon, which takes place in Kalos around 10 years in the future after X and Y. If the Pokemon Horizons anime does take a detour to Lumiose City when Legends ZA releases, it could be possible that Lyco and her friends come across the Malamar who time traveled into the future, and then they have to stop them. It would be a legendary completion to a drop plot point, and maybe we'll even see the evil Malamar trio referenced in the game itself as part of a side quest. The games have referenced the anime before, and we know thanks to leaks that Malamar will be receiving a spot in the limelight in Legends ZA, which would be a good opportunity to bring these evil Malamar back. Paldean Backpacker. In Pokemon Sword and Shield, Backpacker Diane on Route 6 says that she came from a foreign region to see the gym challenge in Galar. After defeating her, she speaks Spanish, saying muy dramatico, fantastico. The allusion to a foreign region, as well as her speaking Spanish afterwards, seems to be a clear indication that she's from a region that would speak Spanish, which did not exist at the time. Game Freak has been known to drop hints in their games about what the region in the next game would be, so this is an obvious hint that the next game would be a region based on Spain. Claydol depicts Celesteela. In Claydol's Ultramoon Pokédex entry, it states that the ancient people who initially created it modeled it after something that descended from the sky. It also notes that Claydol can fire beams from both arms. Well, we have a good idea of what could have inspired Claydol. Celesteela. Celesteela is an Ultramoon exclusive, and its Pokédex entries talk about how it fires highly energetic gas from its two arms, something Claydol's Ultramoon entry seems to be referencing. And Celesteela could have descended from the sky in ancient times, as it would have come out of an Ultra wormhole. So yes, Claydol was basically just an ancient people trying to make a rough recreation of Celesteela. Very cool lore tidbit. Cool Trainer Nick is a cheater. Anyone who has played the bug catching competition in Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal knows about the scourge that is Cool Trainer Nick. He is infamous for being nearly impossible to beat, as he always seems to catch the best Pokemon to win the contest. In fact, it's recommended that if you see that he's participating in the contest, you reset until he's not in the contest. In every contest that he participates in, he catches either a level 14 Scyther, a level 17 Butterfree, or a level 15 Pinsir. The level 14 Scyther is the Pokemon in the contest that gives you the best chance of winning if you catch it, but you can't even find a level 17 Butterfree or level 15 Pinsir in the bug catching contest at all. That means that he's using illegal Pokemon caught outside the bug catching contest and then passing it off as if he caught them during the contest. There's probably someone working for the contest in cahoots with him, giving him the sport balls that he can use to catch these bug types outside the national park, and then he smuggles them into the competition. Canon Serebii map. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, a map of the Pokemon world is seen. This map is actually a pixelated version of Serebii's Poke-Earth map, containing all the regions up to that point in time. The Serebii map is fan-made, so Game Freak using it in an official game is shocking. It came as a surprise to the Serebii owners as well, as they didn't know this was going to be in the game. It's unknown whether this was Game Freak's way of giving a nod to Serebii due to being a reliable compendium of Pokemon information and a cornerstone of the Pokemon community, or it could just be that a Game Freak employee just looked up Pokemon World Map on Google Images, downloaded the first one, and used that as an asset in the game, not knowing it was fan-made. Regardless of the reason, the community was super stoked to see this, and Joe Merrick, owner of Serebii, was very happy that something from Serebii made it into an official game. The site is basically his passion project that he kept running through his blood, sweat, and tears, so it's nice that after dedicating his life to helping the Pokemon community, something he made was immortalized in an official Pokemon game. Mirror Ash is a champion. The Mirror World is an alternate world explored in the Pokemon X, Y, and Z anime, which is identical to the normal world, but all the people and Pokemon in the Mirror World would have their personalities reversed. As such, the Mirror Universe's Ash is shy and weak, as opposed to regular Ash being a confident and strong person. However, since he's the opposite of Ash, many people joke that Mirror Ash, despite being this crybaby insecure character, was able to become the champion of every league until Alola in the World League, which would be the opposite of regular Ash losing all of his league battles until those two. This leads one to wonder how Mirror Ash would be able to accomplish such a feat. Like, this is someone who is incompetent and is less passionate about battling and adventuring, which makes me think that Mirror Ash just became league champion 6 times in a row by sheer luck, and still yet suffers from self-esteem issues. Magnezone transmissions. Several Pokédex entries from Magnezone mention that it seems to be receiving and sending mysterious radio signals to and from outer space. Of course, Magnezone is based on a UFO, with some dex entries actually referencing this, so it's possible that it does actually have an alien connection. Since the first time this space connection is explicitly mentioned in is Sun and Moon, maybe it's actually communicating with Ultra Space, using signals to talk to the various intelligent species we see in the different worlds of Ultra Space. Megavolt is the strongest move. In the Adventures manga, Red's Pikachu uses the move Megavolt to finally defeat Lance. It's a move that doesn't exist in the game, but it's described as having the strength of 10 Thunderbolts. In the game, Thunderbolt has a base power of 90, which would mean that Megavolt has a base power of around 900, making it the strongest non-Z move ever if it existed in the game. Wait in the usual place. If you go to the Lumiose City train station, you see a strange message on the schedule board. A note reading, "I'm going to go for help, wait in the usual place." A very ominous message, implying that there are people in distress. This isn't elaborated upon further, but it's possible that it's connected to some other Lumiose mysteries. Near the sign, there's a young boy whose only dialogue is, "It should be somewhere around here, right?" This sounds like a response to the note. The writer asks the boy to wait at the usual place. The boy is now waiting at the usual place, but hasn't seen whoever wrote the note, so now he's doubting if he's in the right place. But who wrote the note? Well, it could be one of Pokemon's most famous mysteries, the Lumiose Ghost Girl. While I did share another theory about her prior, it's possible that she is an actual ghost girl, likely this boy's sister, who wants to go get help as she wrote in the note. However, what she was trying to escape from caught up to her and killed her, leaving her spirit to wander that one building in Lumiose. However, she still does care about a younger brother, so every time someone enters the room she haunts, she goes up to them and checks if they're her brother. And since she never finds him, she says, "No, you're not the one." And all this time, the poor kid is left alone at the Lumiose station, waiting for his sister, who would never return. This is actually a pretty good answer to the Ghost Girl mystery, and there was possibly a storyline here that was cut from the final game, as well as many other potential features in X and Y. Hopefully Legend ZA alludes to this decade-long mystery, and finally gives us some closure regarding what actually happened here. Charizard's disobedience. Ash's Charizard is infamous for disobeying him. Why is this the case? In-universe, this is because once Charmander evolved to Charmeleon, it felt as if it was too strong for Ash and didn't respect him as a trainer. However, it could also be a nod to an in-game mechanic. In the games, a Pokemon you are the original trainer of will always obey you, but a Pokemon initially owned by someone else will not obey you if you don't have enough badges. This is supposed to prevent a new player from getting a level 100 legendary in trade, and just curb-stomping the game with it. This theory states that Ash's Charmeleon and later Charizard disobeying him is a reference to this game rule. Charmander is not originally Ash's Pokemon, but rather belonged to another trainer who treated it poorly. So, since Ash is not the OT, Charmander would be bound by the badge requirement and will start to disobey him if it became too high level while Ash did not have enough badges. However, there is one issue. In the Gen 1 games, a trainer with 5 badges will always be obeyed by Pokemon up to level 60. Ash already had 5 badges by the time Charmander evolves into Charmeleon and Charizard, which is level 36. So unless the Charmeleon had its evolution withheld until level 60, it should have been obeying Ash under the game rules. But ultimately, the game rule is a substitute mechanic that says outsider Pokemon won't obey you unless you're a good trainer, with badges determining how good you are. The anime shows this same rule, but is able to show a more nuanced definition of what a good trainer is. Faraway Island in Guyana. Faraway Island is implied to be the home of Mew, and Mew has also been stated to be discovered in Guyana according to the journals found in the Pokemon Mansion. So we can extrapolate and say that the Faraway Island is in Guyana, or at least a Pokemon equivalent of that country. The climate definitely matches between the two, as both are tropical areas. Bidoof's Wish Butterfly Effect. This is referring to the special episode in Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Sky called Bidoof's Wish. This episode takes place before the main story of the game and involves Bidoof finding Jirachi and asking a wish, specifically wishing that more Pokemon joined Wigglytuff's guild so that he could befriend them. Of course, this wish is implied to have been granted when the player and their partner join the guild, kicking off the events of the story. And considering that Pokemon Super Mystery Dungeon is a soft sequel to all the prior Mystery Dungeon games, it's likely that Bidoof's wish also influenced the events of that game. So yeah, a bunch of crazy stuff, including the world being saved from destruction multiple times, could have happened because Bidoof wanted to feel less lonely. Lance's kill counts. This is talking about the manga where Lance is evil, and there is an event where Lance and his Dragonair go to Vermilion City where a surfing contest was being held, and Lance orders his Dragonair to violently pull the surfers out to sea. He then orders Dragonair to use Hyper Beam on the city itself, destroying around half of it. Of course, this insanity would have presumably killed many people, but since these events were never brought up again, we don't know how many people died, if any. Honestly, I initially thought this entry was talking about how in the Gen 2 games, Lance orders his Dragonite to use Hyper Beam on a person, which would almost certainly kill the guy, but he does make a cameo in Pokemon Masters, so I guess he did survive that. Movie 16 Mewtwo is part human. Pokemon which have Mega Stones need a human to Mega Evolve, as Mega Evolution is born from the bond between Pokemon and trainer. However, in the 16th movie, Mewtwo is able to Mega Evolve on its own without needing a human trainer. This theory states that Mewtwo has human DNA in it, allowing it to bypass the necessary bond with its trainer and just be able to Mega Evolve on its own, as the human DNA within it fulfills the human requirement for Mega Evolution. And honestly, just look at Mewtwo, that thing is definitely part human. Godstone. In Generations 5 through 7, an unattainable key item called the Godstone was found in the code, with its description only saying a rare stone. While we technically don't know its function, visually it looks like a gray version of the Light and Dark Stone, which are the dormant forms of Reshiram and Zekrom. So it can be assumed that the Godstone was meant to be an equivalent dormant form of Kyurem, perhaps in the code for Black and White, and supposed to be a key item in Black and White 2, before some story changes made it a permanently scrapped item. However, the name Godstone implies something more powerful than Kyurem, which could actually be the original dragon. Maybe there was a scrapped storyline where by combining Light and Dark Stone, you get the Godstone, and if you give the Godstone to Kyurem, it becomes the ultimate dragon. Kadabra holding Everstone. This is referring to a really strange feature that only affects Kadabra. Of course, Kadabra evolves into Alakazam when it's traded. If you want to trade a Kadabra to someone else without evolving it into an Alakazam, you would give it an Everstone to prevent it from evolving. Except this doesn't work. For every other Pokemon that evolves via trade, making it hold an Everstone stops it from evolving. Everyone who traded a Medicham to Mindy in the Generation 4 games learned that the hard way. But for some reason, a Kadabra that's holding an Everstone will still evolve when traded. This has been the case since Generation 4. One might think that this is a glitch, but it's not. You can actually find the source code of Pokemon Diamond uploaded on GitHub after someone decompiled it, and shockingly it hasn't been taken down yet. I would post screenshots to better explain my point, but honestly Nintendo might actually send assassins after me for that, so you'll just have to take my word for it. If you look at the code file that contains Pokemon attributes and navigate to the part that handles evolution, you can see that they specifically programmed the Everstone so that its effect would be ignored if the Pokemon holding it is Kadabra. So the fact that Game Freak specifically programmed in Kadabra ignoring the Everstone is really interesting. Some people say that this is because of the whole Uri Geller controversy. Uri Geller is a psychic whose whole gimmick was supposedly bending spoons with his mind. In 2000, he would sue Nintendo for £60 million, claiming that Kadabra was appropriating his identity, as the Japanese name for Kadabra, Yungara, sounded like his name, and that Kadabra's main identity, being a psychic bending spoons, was ripping him off. The lawsuit is why Kadabra was removed from the TCG until 2020. So some people say that Game Freak specifically added this clause for Kadabra because they literally didn't want players using Kadabra more than necessary due to Geller, to the point where they even force it to evolve with an Everstone. But I don't think that really makes sense. Like, if they were that paranoid about Geller, they just wouldn't have the Aberline be a part of the regional dex of the game and have it be used by several trainers. Also, Gen 4 came out 6 years after the lawsuit. If Geller was the cause, they would have made this change years before in Gen 3. Another theory provides an in-universe explanation, saying that since Kadabra is so intelligent, stuff like Everstones can't block it from evolving, and it simply just evolves when it wants to, only stopping if the trainer directly orders it not to. Which would be a cool testament to the line's power if held items are unable to limit it. This is fun, but I doubt Game Freak would add a mechanic that directly contradicts the stated use of a gameplay item, just for minor lore. I think this is one of the few entries on this whole iceberg that's a true mystery. There's no reasonable explanation, and only the programmers at Game Freak know why they did this. I really hope somebody gets the opportunity to ask a Game Freak employee, or even a higher-up like Masuda, about why the Everstone doesn't work in Kadabra. I'm really curious to see what their reasoning is. Dewford Ruins. In Season 6 Episode 1 of the anime, Team Magma and Aqua find a shrine underneath Dewford Island, which they mistake as the Cave of Origin. However, this of course isn't the case. So what exactly is this random shrine near Dewford Town? While the creator of this iceberg says that this is a completely new location that isn't brought up, I personally think that it could be a part of Granite Cave, especially since in Oras we see that there's a pretty cool mural in there that could definitely be part of some ancient shrine. Togepi's father. In Heart Gold and Soul Silver, you get a Togepi egg. Once hatched, it knows the move Extra Sensory, which is an egg move. The only compatible parent to Togepi that can learn Extra Sensory by level up and passes it down as an egg move is the Hoot Hoot line. So it's heavily implied that either a Hoot Hoot or an Octowl is the father of the Togepi we hatch. Platinum Battle Revolution. Pokemon Battle Revolution is a battle sim released for the Wii, and would allow the player to transfer Pokemon from Diamond and Pearl, as well as Platinum, to battle in the game. It would also give you the opportunity to transfer Pokemon you want as prizes in Revolution to Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. However, once Platinum released, there would be some compatibility issues with some of the Pokemon regarding Revolution, as new additions like the Rotom forms and Origin Giratina could not be transferred properly. People would expect a Battle Revolution update to properly support Pokemon Platinum, but it never happened. Or did it? You see, back in the late 2000s, competitive Pokemon tournaments were played on Battle Revolution, which was the case with the VGC World Tournament in 2009. If you look closely at some of the gameplay footage, it becomes apparent that the Battle Revolution used in the tournament is not the same as the one the public had access to. The most obvious difference are the player models. Lucas and Dawn are seen in their Pokemon Platinum clothing. Normally, if you connect to Revolution using a Gen 4 game, even if it was Pokemon Platinum, your player would be Lucas or Dawn, but in their Diamond and Pearl clothing. The Platinum clothes were not available at all in the entire game. There were additionally some minor changes from the regular Battle Revolution, such as team previews being hidden. So clearly, this was some new version of the game, presumably a Platinum update due to the outfits. We never actually saw if this version supported the new forms Platinum introduced, but it is highly possible. It could also be possible that this version could have been planned to release as an updated version for Battle Revolution. However, no such update ever arrived. We never got to see any more of this mysterious Battle Revolution edition, as the year after that, tournaments would use Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver as their official medium. Maybe this is why they never released the Platinum update. They planned to, and then realized the game was at the end of its lifespan, so they decided against it. A pretty shoddy reason, but one I could see them making. Fire Emblem crossover. According to an interview with some Nintendo executive, there was some initial planning done for a crossover between Pokemon and Fire Emblem, believing that the two properties were compatible for a crossover. However, they were unaware that the Pokemon group had already started planning Pokemon Conquest, which is basically just Fire Emblem but in a Pokemon setting. So due to this, there was no niche for a crossover to fill, and the idea was scrapped. Elite Four Giovanni. In the original build to Gen 1 games, Giovanni was actually an Elite Four member, being in the spot where Bruno ended up being. This is why in the game, the music that plays in Bruno's room is the Team Rocket hideout theme. Additionally, the room Bruno is in looks more like it would fit a ground-type specialist rather than a fighting-type specialist. Though honestly, back then with the Gen 1 graphics, there wasn't much detail that could make a room seem fighting-type. I'm guessing Giovanni was moved to the 8th gym leader slot because having the twist that he was a league member would feel more climactic if he was a final gym leader, rather than just plopped in the middle of the Elite Four gauntlet. Ash died in Tower of Terror. In the anime episode Tower of Terror, a chandelier falls on Ash and Pikachu, after which ghost Pokemon pull their spirits out of their bodies, and their spirits even react to seeing their bodies. While their spirits are out exploring, Brock and Misty find them under their chandelier, pull them out, and try and get them to wake up. After this, their spirits return to their bodies, and they continue on as normal. Of course, it's definitely implied here that Ash and Pikachu died, and came back to life, although they couldn't explicitly say it because it is a kid's show. Movie 3 Original Script. So the third Pokemon movie initially had a bonkers script, way different than what the final version ended up being. The movie was meant to explore the subject of real-world animals in the Pokemon world, believe it or not. Basically, the question was raised as to why only Pokemon seem to exist as animals in this world, when other real-world life like humans and trees also existed. This Pokemon would say that all real-world animals did exist, but went extinct, apparently recently enough where photographs of them would exist. However, nobody still alive actually remembers seeing them, so they are a huge mystery. The plot of the movie would revolve around scientists finding a T-Rex fossil. Not a T-Rex Pokemon, just a straight-up T-Rex fossil. The fossil would be revived, but goes berserk, rampaging through Kanto and destroying everything in its path. Now Ash, his friends, and Team Rocket have to team up to defeat the T-Rex. This information came from a blog post that detailed an interview with Takeshi Shudo, the original writer of the anime, who did have a bunch of weird ideas of what he thought the world of Pokemon should be, so the script fits right in with that. And honestly, back then, when there weren't that many Pokemon, the idea that Pokemon were just these weird new creatures that popped up while regular animals still existed makes sense. It's like Pokemon were intended to be something more akin to cryptids rather than regular animals, rarer creatures with strange supernatural aspects. However, as the Pokemon world became more developed, and as more Pokemon were introduced, they did decide to go in the direction of Pokemon just being a full replacement of real-world animals. Of course, Movie 3 did end up being about Entei in the end, but it would be interesting if they went with this original script. I think if they did do so, people would still be talking about the third movie, as it would be such an insane outlier compared to the rest, and a time capsule of how weird pre-Gen 3 Pokemon was. Silver stole Sneasel. So it's common knowledge that in the Gen 2 games, Silver steals his starter Pokemon, the one who's stronger against yours. However, Silver stole another Pokemon from a man named Kirk in Cianwood City, who tells you that he was bullied by Silver into giving up one of his Pokemon. Kirk actually does end up giving the player a Shuckle, which is cool. But what Pokemon did he give up to Silver? Well, through inference, it's easy to see that the Pokemon Silver stole was Sneasel. First of all, Sneasel can't be found in Johto. It can only be found in Mount Silver, only accessible to high-level trainers. However, Silver was able to get a Sneasel way before that point. In fact, the first time he uses one in battle is after Cianwood City, when he would have stole Sneasel. And it's also supposed to be a reversal of the starter situation. While Silver stole the starter strong against yours, he actually stole the Pokemon that has a weak type matchup against yours. Shuckle's Bug Rock typing is super effective against both of Sneasel's types, Dark and Ice. So yes, I think Silver stole Sneasel from Kirk. Honestly, I feel like a lot of people wish he decided to steal Shuckle instead, since many more people would have liked to have been gifted Sneasel by Kirk. As much as I love Shuckle, even in the Johto remakes, it's completely inviable to use in an in-game playthrough. What a shame, Silver definitely picked the right Pokemon to steal. Hilbert and Hilda died. A dark entry to end off the Slayer. We've got the theory that the protagonist of Black and White 1, either Hilbert or Hilda, died in the time period between Black and White 1 and Black and White 2. There are two pieces of evidence for it: the fact that they are missing in the sequels, as well as their mother's dialogue in the sequels. First of all, despite being direct sequels to Black and White 1, Black and White 2 do not feature the original protagonists at all. There was actually cut content of them being a boss in the Pokemon World Tournament, but since it's not in the final game, I won't consider it canon. However, we get actual information about the protagonist when you visit their mom. Immediately after entering the Black and White 1 player's house, their mom says, "Welcome home, dear," and asks if we found the friend that we were looking for, N. The mom is then surprised to see that we aren't her kid, but rather someone else. After this, she does share some other dialogue, most notably being, Maybe I should go on a journey of my own to find my child. Oh, but I would feel really bad if they stopped by while I was gone. No news is good news, they say. Being happy about something like that is a little difficult though. Being a parent is tough. This shows that Hilbert or Hilda has basically been missing for a long amount of time, to the point where they didn't even contact their mother, and she is debating going out and searching for them herself. A bit suspicious, especially considering that by the time of Black and White, video call technology already existed, meaning that it shouldn't be difficult to just call their mother if necessary. So they could have died while searching for N, and either their mom doesn't know this and is still waiting on their return, or she does know this and is simply in denial due to the overwhelming grief, telling herself that they'll be returning home any day. While edgy dramatic theories like this are fun, I think if they were implied to be dead, there would be a lot more evidence hinting towards it, maybe even a line of dialogue from Gestas alluding to the idea that he killed them. And this is a Pokemon world, where children going on long, dangerous adventures is normal, so I'm sure Hilbert and Hilda are fine. With that, Layer 5 of the Pokemon Conspiracy Iceberg is over. We just passed the halfway point of this iceberg, so there's still a lot more to cover. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to support me, and hit that bell so you can be notified when the next part in this series is uploaded. If you would like to support me further, please consider joining my Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. But as always, I'm glad you watched and enjoyed this video. Thank you, and I'll see you guys next time.